With the new Panigale V2 and the new Yamaha R9, we have two similar concepts but with different designs. If you're wondering which motorcycle suits you better or which one is the better choice, I was one of the few who had the chance to ride both bikes on the same racetrack, so I can share some valuable insights with you. Stay tuned. Yes, I'm back from partly sunny Spain, where I recently took part in two test rides. One was with the Panigale V2 and the other just a few days ago with the Yamaha R9. We tested the Panigale V2 on a racetrack near Seville, a fantastic brand new track, perfect for evaluating bikes like these, especially in a sporty setting. The Yamaha R9 was actually supposed to be tested in Jerez, but the rain there was so torrential that everything was practically underwater. You might have heard about it in passing, perhaps even in the news. Because of this, Yamaha made the decision to find an alternative racetrack, something they handled brilliantly. The very next day, we relocated to the exact same track where we had tested the Panigale V2. That, of course, sets up the perfect opportunity for a direct comparison between the two bikes. And that's why I want to share some interesting insights with you. The goal for both manufacturers was to create a super sporty motorcycle, but also with the consideration that it should still be comfortable to ride. These two aspects often contradict each other, so the challenge was to find a balance. And I have to say, both brands have come up with excellent concepts that perform very well. Let's dive into the details and take a closer look at the differences in the engines. Fundamentally, both bikes are designed with the same goal in mind: to offer a highly sporty motorcycle while still making significant concessions for rider comfort. That's why they've stepped away from an extremely radical setup and instead opted for a riding position and overall dynamics that are much more comfort-oriented. Yamaha took the approach of using their well-established three-cylinder engine from the MT-09 to ensure strong propulsion. Ducati, on the other hand, went with the V2, the same engine we already know from the previous Panigale V2. However, they made slight modifications, reducing its displacement slightly and integrating it into a completely new concept. Structurally, the differences in the engines are typical. The three-cylinder is a very smooth-running unit. Many of you will know it from the MT-09, and it offers a broad power band. It delivers a very even power output from low revs to high revs, which is an advantage both on the track and on the road. With the Panigale, they've tried to extract more low-end power from the V2, partly thanks to the variable valve timing system they've implemented. This is actually one of the strengths of a V2 engine, though it has struggled a bit in recent years. The reason for this is that modern emission regulations are quite restrictive, and as a result, many V2 engines have lost some of their characteristic low-end torque, even though that used to be one of their biggest advantages. In a direct comparison, these two engines behave quite similarly. They have similar displacement and peak power, and you can feel that both engines don't rev as freely towards the top end. This is due to the latest emission standard Euro 5+, which limits the engine's performance as it approaches the rev limiter. However, when comparing the two directly, the three-cylinder from the R9 stands out for its stronger torque at lower revs. Up to around 6,000 revolutions per minute, the three-cylinder pulls harder from the bottom end and provides more punch right from the start. From 6,000 revolutions per minute up to the limiter, the differences are actually minimal. Both engines taper off slightly at the top end, which is down to the Euro 5+ regulations. These restrict the exhaust flow, particularly as the engine approaches the rev limiter. However, both bikes offer a solution to this issue: aftermarket exhaust systems available as accessories, which help prevent this restriction and allow the engine to continue pulling strongly all the way to the limiter. Another key difference between the two engines is in partial load conditions. With the V2 in the Ducati, there is a slight delay when opening the throttle before the power is fully applied. In contrast, the three-cylinder engine reacts a bit more directly, but without being overly aggressive. It is very easy to modulate and control, providing more power even with a smaller throttle input. This gives a more direct connection to the engine compared to the Ducati. One thing that was particularly noticeable is that the V2 in the Ducati has significantly less engine braking. The electronics allow you to further reduce engine braking by keeping the throttle valve slightly open when the throttle is fully closed. This means that during deceleration, the system effectively provides a bit more power, reducing engine braking. I always switched this function off completely to experience the maximum engine braking effect. Even then, it was clear that the Ducati engine inherently provides much less engine braking than expected. Interestingly, this is quite surprising because the V2 concept is typically known for strong engine braking due to its large individual cylinder displacement. However, in this case, that was not the case, most likely due to the throttle valve settings. Unfortunately, this cannot be increased. It is simply part of the bike's design. The only adjustment possible is to reduce engine braking even further, which wouldn't make much sense in this case. So this was a very striking difference between the two engine configurations. Another key factor in riding dynamics is, of course, the electronic rider aids and the overall electronics package. By now, the electronics on both bikes have reached a very mature level, working smoothly and reliably. They also integrate well with these engine concepts, as neither of these bikes are extreme power monsters and both deliver power in a very smooth and controlled manner. Even though there are slight differences in throttle response, both bikes provide a very soft and manageable power delivery. This means that the traction control and other intervention systems do not have to work excessively hard. However, when they do step in, they do so in a very subtle manner without abruptly cutting power or creating any disruptive riding experience. Both systems perform very well in this regard. Where differences do exist is in the range of electronic features and additional functions. One aspect I really like about the Yamaha is the integrated data recording system. This can be visualized in a user-friendly way using a dedicated app, allowing riders to analyze all riding data without any additional costs. This feature is not available in the same way on the Ducati. Both bikes do offer lap timer functionality, but this always requires an additional GPS module to function. This GPS receiver is needed to provide the system with a trigger signal when crossing the start-finish line, ensuring accurate lap timing. In everyday riding, electronics are becoming increasingly important. Features like navigation make a significant difference for street riders, providing valuable assistance. And in this area, I have to say Yamaha has a slight advantage. Without having extensively tested it on the racetrack, the Yamaha offers several useful navigation features. The full navigation display is available directly on the bike's screen, making it much easier for the rider to follow directions while on the move. Being able to read and decipher this information precisely is important. One significant aspect of the electronics and a key difference between the two motorcycles is the Quickshifter. Both bikes feature an up and down shifting system, also known as a blipper system. However, on the Ducati, this system operates via a position sensor located inside the gearbox. This sensor does not apply any preload to the transmission or the system itself. It simply detects the position of the shift lever and then initiates the gear change. The downside of this approach is that if there is little to no preload on the system, the gear shift can feel a bit rough. If the shift lever is only lightly engaged, the shifting process takes longer because the gear does not slot in as quickly or smoothly. As a result, on the Ducati, while gear changes were effortless to initiate, the engagement of the next gear was not always as crisp as it should be. This sometimes led to either long interruption times or even double interruptions in quick succession. On a racetrack where smooth power delivery out of corners is crucial, these double interruptions or delays can be frustrating as they disrupt acceleration. On the road, this issue might not be as noticeable since the demands are different. However, it is still clear that there is a major functional difference between the two systems. And in this case, Yamaha has a clear advantage. Another significant difference lies in the chassis design approach taken by the two manufacturers. Ducati uses what is known as a monocoque chassis, which is extremely minimalistic. It weighs just 4 kilograms and essentially only connects the steering head to the engine. Unlike a traditional frame, it is not a fully self-supporting structure that distributes forces from the handlebars to the swing arm. Instead, its primary function is to serve as a link between the steering head and the engine. In this setup, the engine itself acts as a load-bearing component, integrating into the structure and supporting the swing arm while distributing forces throughout the entire bike. Yamaha, on the other hand, follows a more conventional approach with a complete frame within which the engine is mounted. Here, the frame itself absorbs and distributes the forces, forming a solid connection between the steering head and the swing arm. Compared to Ducati's design, Yamaha's frame is significantly heavier. It weighs approximately 9.7 kilograms, which, while being the lightest frame Yamaha has ever built, is still a noticeable difference when compared to Ducati's 4-kilogram frame. The difference between 4 kilograms and nearly 10 kilograms is substantial, at least when considering the frame alone. This, of course, contributes to an overall weight difference between the two motorcycles. Depending on the specific version of the Ducati, there is a standard model and an S version. The S version is approximately 3 to 4 kilograms lighter than the standard model. The total weight difference between the Yamaha and Ducati in ready-to-ride condition without fuel is around 7 kilograms. This weight difference also has an impact on overall riding dynamics. Another chassis-related difference is the engine configuration. The 3-cylinder engine in the Yamaha is physically wider than the V2 in the Panigale, meaning that the Yamaha's frame has to be built around the engine. As a result, the overall width of the Yamaha is significantly greater than that of the Panigale V2. Ducati, as mentioned earlier, does not build a frame around the engine. Instead, the frame is essentially the same width as the engine itself, resulting in an extremely slim design. This becomes particularly evident when sitting on the bike. The Panigale feels noticeably narrower compared to the Yamaha R9, which has approximately the same width as its predecessor, the R6. Since the R9 is ultimately intended to replace the R6, it maintains similar overall dimensions. This means that when sitting on the bike, the R9 gives off a very different impression due to its greater width compared to the Panigale V2. However, where there is light, there is also shadow. The compact and more tightly built design of the Ducati comes with a trade-off: significantly less wind protection for the rider. The front section of the Panigale is both narrower and smaller in height compared to the Yamaha. As a result, the level of wind protection is considerably lower, which becomes especially noticeable at high speeds on the racetrack. Even when adopting a very aggressive racing posture, the Panigale generates significantly more turbulence, exposing the rider to more wind pressure. On the Yamaha, however, the rider has a much easier time because the fairing provides more wind protection, making for a more relaxed riding experience. In terms of handling, the Panigale benefits significantly from its slim design, making it noticeably easier to maneuver. At higher speeds, it feels lighter and more agile, allowing the rider to guide it through corners more effortlessly. This advantage is particularly noticeable at high speeds. At lower speeds in first or second gear corners, the differences are hardly noticeable, as the Yamaha is also remarkably agile. It is only at higher speeds that the R9 feels a little more, let's not say stable, but rather slightly more sluggish compared to the Panigale. As long as the front wheel maintains contact with the ground, both motorcycles are very stable and provide precise feedback. However, in situations where the front wheel starts to lift slightly, the Yamaha experiences minor instability and slight handlebar movements. These can be better absorbed and stabilized with the help of a steering damper. The seating position on both bikes is quite sporty, but still makes significant concessions to rider comfort. It is not like older supersport models where you are forced into an extreme forward-leaning position with the handlebars far away from the seat. Instead, the riding position is relatively relaxed, allowing for good control and feel of the front wheel without major compromises in cornering performance. One noticeable aspect on both bikes is that due to this more relaxed seating position, where the handlebars are positioned closer to the seat, the distance between the elbows and knees is a bit tight. When transitioning into a more aggressive riding posture, I personally found that my elbow would occasionally make contact with my knee, making a dynamic riding position more difficult. This issue can be addressed on both motorcycles by adjusting the handlebar position slightly forward or rotating them forward, that simple adjustment would help eliminate this knee-elbow conflict. In this regard, there is little difference between the two motorcycles. Both exhibit this issue when it comes to fully committed sporty riding. For everyday street riding, however, it is unlikely to be a problem, as riders tend to sit more upright, reducing the likelihood of their elbows hitting their knees. When it comes to braking, there are no major differences between the two bikes. Both offer outstanding braking performance with similar components used in their braking systems. On the racetrack, both deliver excellent deceleration. Additionally, both motorcycles allow the rider to disable the ABS intervention on the rear wheel via the electronics, enabling maximum braking performance on the track. This prevents the ABS system from detecting rear wheel lift-off too early and releasing brake pressure prematurely, which would otherwise unnecessarily extend braking distances. This is a great feature available on both motorcycles, particularly beneficial for achieving optimal braking performance on the racetrack. There are also noticeable differences in the suspension setups of the two motorcycles. The Panigale V2S, for example, is equipped with a full Öhlins suspension system. This includes an Öhlins front fork and an Öhlins rear shock. The Yamaha, on the other hand, comes with standard components from Kayaba. These Kayaba components perform very well. Even on the racetrack, they are sport-oriented and provide solid handling. However, they do not quite offer the same level of reserve as the Öhlins setup on the Panigale. This becomes particularly apparent in extreme situations such as very late braking or when trying to get on the throttle early and generate maximum traction. In these cases, the Öhlins suspension showcases its superior experience, providing more reserve capacity and greater confidence in demanding conditions. For street riding, this may not be a critical factor, as riders rarely push their bikes to the absolute limit in everyday situations. However, it is always reassuring to know that there is extra suspension reserve available when needed. If the road surface is poor or there are sudden bumps or steps in the asphalt, the Öhlins suspension provides an additional layer of confidence and control compared to the Kayaba setup. That said, the Kayaba suspension on the Yamaha R9 still performed well on the racetrack, offering a solid ride overall. However, in the final analysis, the Öhlins suspension on the Panigale still has the upper hand. So let's get to the big question. Which of these two motorcycles is the better one? That is quite difficult to answer because I believe it is highly dependent on individual preferences and which engine concept one favors. The V2 certainly has a large fan base and has proven in the past that it delivers strong performance and by now good reliability. As we mentioned in the individual videos, it no longer features desmodromic technology, but instead uses conventional valve springs to close the valves. This allows for longer adjustment and service intervals, even on a V2 engine. As for the three-cylinder engine, I must say it is something I personally like a lot. It combines the advantages of both a V2 and a four-cylinder engine while avoiding the downsides of these two concepts. The three-cylinder engine runs very smoothly and has a very linear power delivery. It can handle full throttle, even from idle without causing any jerky behavior. That is not always the case with a V2. These engines tend to be a bit rough at low revs and usually need around 3000 revolutions per minute before they start running smoothly. The three-cylinder does not have this issue. It delivers strong power across the entire rev range. Another advantage of the three-cylinder is its ability to rev higher, thanks to its smaller individual cylinder displacement and lower rotating masses compared to a similarly sized V2, where the total displacement is divided between only two cylinders instead of three. The only real drawback of the three-cylinder compared to the V2 is that it is physically wider. This difference is noticeable when comparing the R9 and the Panigale, particularly in their handling characteristics. At high speeds, where the gyroscopic forces of the wheels come into play, the R9 is slightly less eager to lean into corners than the Panigale. Even at maximum lean, the Panigale makes it easier to hold tight cornering lines or adjust them mid-corner. It allows for a sharper turn-in, which is a significant advantage for riders who prefer a V-style cornering technique, diving in aggressively, quickly transitioning and accelerating out early. Here, the Panigale has a distinct edge because its engine and overall design are narrower and lighter. Another contributing factor is the crankshaft design. In a V2, the cylinders are arranged in line with each other, making the crankshaft much narrower. In contrast, a 3-cylinder engine has its cylinders positioned side by side, naturally requiring a wider crankshaft. At high revs, the width and weight of the crankshaft act like a stabilizing bar, making it harder to lean the bike into corners and rotate it through turns. Anyone who has ever held a fast-spinning wheel and tried to tilt it knows how strong these gyroscopic forces can be. This is exactly what happens with the R9. Its slightly wider crankshaft makes it a bit less eager to carve through corners compared to the Panigale. This is a clear and noticeable difference between the two bikes. One striking aspect of the Panigale, however, is its minimal engine braking. This means that it is best to enter corners in a relatively high gear. If the selected gear is too high, the already reduced engine braking becomes even weaker, making it harder to get the bike to turn mid-corner. Even though the Panigale's chassis allows for sharp, aggressive cornering, ideal for a V-style line, the rider must select the correct gear carefully. If the gear is too high, there is almost no engine braking available to help reposition the bike before opening the throttle again. This is something to be aware of when riding the Panigale. Overall, in terms of performance and lap times, these two motorcycles are quite evenly matched. With minor modifications, both bikes can achieve very similar lap times. However, it is worth noting that the Yamaha costs significantly less to purchase than the Ducati. To get the best track performance from the Yamaha, some investment in suspension upgrades is necessary. But since the Yamaha has a much lower purchase price, there is still plenty of budget left for those upgrades, allowing for further improvements if needed. That was all very track-focused. On the road, however, the Yamaha has several advantages as well, especially when it comes to rider comfort and wind protection. The Yamaha offers quite a bit more. In terms of electronics, Yamaha also scores a few extra points over the Ducati. I hope I have been able to help you in forming your opinion about these two motorcycles. I also want to take this opportunity to sincerely thank you for all the positive messages and comments I have received from you. Even though I may not always reply, I do read them and I really appreciate the feedback. In a way, that's the fuel that keeps me going, knowing that what we do here is genuinely helpful to you. And of course, it makes me happy to read your messages. So please keep posting your kind comments below and maybe leave a like. With that, I'll say goodbye for now and see you next time for the next test review.